Imagine standing inside a canyon so narrow that the river fills every inch of the ground beneath you. The cliffs rise more than 1,000 feet straight into the sky. There isn't a single place to stand, nowhere to build, and no obvious way through. Yet in 1879, a group of railroad workers looked at that impossible landscape and somehow built a railway anyway. They didn't have helicopters, hydraulic drills, or computer models. They had ropes, hammers, black powder, and one chance to get it right. The bridge they created is still carrying trains today. But before anyone drilled the first hole into the rock, another battle had to be won. One fought not with engineering, but with lawsuits, money, and armed men. Everything began because of silver.
In 1877, two prospectors made a discovery near a place called Leadville, Colorado. Hidden inside the mountains was one of the richest silver deposits ever found in the United States. News spread like wildfire. Within 2 years, Leadville exploded from a mining camp into a booming city of around 15,000 people. Every day, enormous amounts of valuable ore needed to leave the mountains. There was only one problem. The fastest route passed through the Royal Gorge. And the Royal Gorge wasn't just difficult. It looked impossible. The Arkansas River had spent millions of years carving a path through solid granite, leaving behind nearly vertical cliffs more than 1,000 feet high. At its narrowest point, the canyon measured only 30 feet across. Those 30 feet were entirely filled by the river. No shoreline, no rocky ledge, no space for railroad tracks. Finding another route would mean building more than 100 extra miles through mountains that locomotives of the time simply couldn't climb. Whoever controlled the gorge would control the silver. Two railroad companies realized that almost simultaneously. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad moved first, sending survey crews into the canyon to claim the route. Just days later, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway arrived with the exact same plan. Neither company was willing to back down. The disagreement quickly left the courtroom and moved into the canyon itself. Both sides hired armed guards. Temporary stone barricades appeared near the entrance to the gorge. Workers carrying railroad equipment now stood side by side with men carrying rifles. For months, lawyers argued in federal courts while armed crews guarded the canyon every single day. Newspapers called it the Royal Gorge War. Despite the name, it wasn't a traditional war between nations. It was two railroad empires fighting over a single stretch of land worth millions of dollars. The legal battle climbed all the way to the United States Supreme Court. At first, it looked like the Santa Fe Railroad had won. But the conflict wasn't over. Behind closed doors, both companies knew the fight was costing more than it was worth. Finally, in 1880, they reached an agreement, later nicknamed the Treaty of Boston. Santa Fe accepted another route. Denver and Rio Grande kept the Royal Gorge. The lawsuits ended. The armed guards disappeared. Now came the truly impossible part. Building a railroad through a canyon where there was literally nowhere to build one.
Winning the canyon in court didn't solve the real problem. It only gave the railroad permission to face it. The crews who entered the Royal Gorge weren't famous engineers. Most were ordinary laborers, Irish immigrants, Mexican miners who already knew how to work high in the mountains, Scandinavian workers searching for better opportunities. Many stayed only a few weeks before moving on to the next railroad project. Some disappeared from the payroll forever. Their names rarely appeared anywhere else. Every morning, they climbed into one of the harshest construction sites in America. The canyon was cold even in the middle of summer. Sunlight reached the river for only a few hours each day. The roar of the Arkansas River echoed between the granite walls so loudly that workers often couldn't hear someone standing only a short distance away. Communication became almost impossible. Everything started with drilling. Before a single rail could be laid, crews had to carve a narrow shelf directly into solid granite. No machines, no hydraulic drills, just 2 men, 1 steel drill, and a heavy hammer. One worker held the drill against the rock. The other swung the hammer over and over again. After every strike, the drill rotated slightly, hour after hour. Sometimes an entire hour of work produced only a few inches of progress. Then came the explosives. Every hole had to be packed carefully.
One mistake could ruin days of work, or far worse. When the charges exploded, another crew cleared away the shattered rock. Then the entire process started again. Slowly, almost painfully, the railroad carved its way through the canyon. But eventually, the workers reached a place where every plan suddenly failed. The canyon narrowed until the river occupied the entire floor. There wasn't a strip of dry land left. The cliffs dropped straight into the water. No foundation could be built. No support columns could stand. Blasting more granite wasn't a safe option either. Engineers feared that removing too much rock could destabilize the entire canyon wall. A collapse could block the river and destroy months of construction.
They needed another solution, something nobody had ever attempted on an American railroad. Instead of building upward from the ground, they decided to build outward from the walls. Iron anchor rods would be drilled directly into both sides of the canyon. Massive beams would extend over the river. Those beams would support a platform, and that platform would carry the railroad itself. It sounded almost unbelievable. A bridge suspended from the cliffs without touching the canyon floor. Today, it's known as the Royal Gorge Hanging Bridge. But coming up with the idea was the easy part. Actually building it would push the workers far beyond anything they had done before. To install those anchors, they would have to hang hundreds of feet above the river, with nothing beneath them except rushing water and solid rock. One mistake, and there would be no second chance. Building the hanging bridge was unlike anything the crews had faced before. There was no solid ground beneath them, no stable platform, just sheer granite walls and a fast-moving river below. To reach the work area, many laborers were lowered down the canyon on simple wooden seats tied to thick ropes. No harnesses, no backup lines. Just a plank, a rope, and complete trust in the men holding it from the rim far above. Once they reached the correct height, the real work began. One worker braced himself against the cold granite and held a steel drill perfectly still. His partner, hanging only a few feet away, swung a heavy hammer again and again. Every strike had to be precise. Every small rotation of the drill mattered. Unlike the blast holes they had drilled earlier, these new holes had almost zero margin for error. If an anchor hole was even slightly off angle, the steel rod wouldn't carry the weight correctly. And if the rods failed, the entire bridge could fail with them. For hours, the crews repeated the same motion. Strike. Turn. Strike. Turn. Sometimes an entire day produced only a handful of finished holes. When the anchors were finally installed, massive iron beams stretched out from both canyon walls. Piece by piece, a wooden platform took shape above the rushing river. For the first time, there was finally somewhere to lay the rails. The impossible crossing was becoming reality.
When construction was completed in 1879, the hanging bridge measured about 175 feet long. Instead of standing on the canyon floor, it clung directly to the granite walls, allowing the Arkansas River to flow untouched beneath it.
No other railroad in the United States had attempted anything like it. Years later, the original wooden structure was replaced with steel to carry heavier trains, but the idea remained exactly the same. The bridge still hangs from the canyon walls today. Tourist trains continue to cross it, slowing down so passengers can see the cliffs rising only a few feet outside their windows. Most visitors admire the view. Few realize what it took to create it. The records remember the railroad executives. They remember the court cases. They remember the famous businessmen who fought over the canyon. But the workers who actually built the bridge almost disappeared from history. Many payroll records list only first names. Some workers appear for a few weeks, then vanish forever. No explanation, no record of where they went or what happened to them. The truth is, we'll probably never know exactly how many people were injured or lost their lives while building the Royal Gorge Railroad. Safety standards barely existed. There was no workers' compensation, no formal accident reporting. If someone could no longer work, another laborer simply took his place. Yet despite all of that, the bridge survived.
Nearly a century and a half later, trains still cross the same impossible gap that once stopped every engineer who stood before it. And that's what makes this story remarkable. Not just because they built a bridge, but because they solved a problem that nature seemed to make impossible. With nothing more than hand tools, raw determination, and the courage to trust a single rope hanging over a 1,000-foot canyon. The next time you cross a bridge, drive through a tunnel, or ride a train through the mountains, remember this. History usually celebrates the people who owned the projects.
But the world we travel through today was built by thousands of workers whose names were almost never written down. Their fingerprints disappeared. Their stories almost disappeared. But the bridge they left behind still speaks for them.